Spring came late to Atlanta that year, and when it came unwilling, bringing with it a soft, grudging rain that moved over the red clay and the dogwoods and the iron balconies of the old houses on Auburn Avenue like a forgiveness that had taken its own sweet time. The first Saturday of April was one of those mornings when the sky could not decide whether to be sorry, whether to let go of the last of winter, whether to allow the pink and white to open on the tree branches. The MARTA trains rumbled quietly through the tunnels beneath the city. The buses pulled up and pulled away, their tires hissing on the wet pavement. The church bells from Ebenezer Baptist Church began at 5 minutes before 8, their early morning call, the same call they had been making for 130 years. And across the street from Ebenezer, on the corner of Auburn and Jackson, the yellow neon of the Piggly Wiggly store came on slowly, one letter after another, the way an old woman puts on her church hat in the mirror. Inside the Piggly Wiggly, at register number 3, a young woman in a faded red cotton head wrap and a navy blue polo shirt was counting out her drawer for the Saturday morning shift. Her name was Imani Ross. She was 27 years old that April, and she was a widow, and she was the mother of one small boy named Jabari. She was an African-American woman, 5 feet and 6 inches tall, softly curvy in the way her mother had been softly curvy. Her warm, medium brown skin showing a faint scattering of freckles across her cheekbones, freckles her grandmother in Alabama had always said were sugar the Lord had sprinkled on a patient child. Her eyes were large and kind and dark, the color of good coffee. Her hair, thick and natural and black, was tucked up this morning beneath a faded red cotton head wrap, knotted at the nape of her neck, the same head wrap her mother had given her on the first day she had gone back to work, 3 months after Jabari had been born, 4 years before. In each ear she wore a single, small, tarnished silver hoop. On her left cheek, just beneath the cheekbone, there was a small crescent-shaped scar, a memory from a fall down the wooden steps of her grandmother's porch in Tuskegee when she had been 11. Her hands, long-fingered and quick, were the hands of a woman who had worked registers and counters since she had been 16 years old, and those hands did not tremble when they counted $20 bills. The store manager, Mrs. Kendra Winters, had been watching Imani through the rear office two-way mirror for the better part of the last 10 minutes. Mrs. Winters was 35 years old that spring, slim, 5 feet and 7 inches tall, with warm, light brown skin and shoulder-length shiny black hair pulled back into a severe low ponytail. She wore a beige polyester Piggly Wiggly manager polo with an embroidered manager patch above her heart, dark wash work trousers, black loafers, and a plastic name badge that read Mrs. Winters, Store Manager. Her lips were thin, painted in a mauve lipstick she reapplied every 45 minutes, and on this morning, as on every morning, she was holding a clipboard the way a magistrate might hold a gavel. She had been for 22 minutes now looking for something she could write up about Register 3. She had not yet found it. Imani did not look up at the mirror. Imani had learned, in the 4 years since she had come to work at this Piggly Wiggly, that the mirror was always looking, and that the sanest thing a worker could do was to decide every morning at 5 minutes to 8 that she would not live her day inside a mirror. She closed the drawer. She keyed in her opening total. She unwrapped a roll of quarters and set them gently in the coin tray. She wiped down the conveyor belt with a folded blue cleaning cloth. She took from her apron pocket the small blue 5 and dime spiral notebook she had carried since she had been 9 years old, and she wrote in her steady hand the single sentence she had written every night of her life, but had not last night been able to come up with in time. She wrote it now, at 7:58 in the morning, while the rain began again outside. She wrote, "The Lord has not forgotten me yet." She closed the notebook. She slid it back into her apron pocket. Across the street, the first bus of the morning pulled away from the MARTA stop. On its bench alone, huddled against the cold rain, sat a small, stooped figure in a wide-brimmed cream felt church hat, a modest navy blue wool overcoat, and white orthopedic shoes, clutching a worn black leather handbag with both gloved hands. She had not risen to board the bus. But Imani did not yet know about the figure on the bench. Imani was preparing for a long Saturday shift, and she was thinking, as she always thought at 5 minutes to 8, about her son. Jabari Ross was 5 years old that April. He had the same warm, medium brown skin as his mother, and the same wide, curious dark brown eyes, and his thick, natural black hair was kept close cut with a sharp fade at the barber shop on Edgewood Avenue where Mr. Percy gave all the church boys $1 off on Wednesdays. There was a small gap between his two front teeth. The gap his grandmother had always said meant a boy would be lucky. He was, that April, entering his last 2 months at the Little Ark Daycare on Edgewood. And on Saturday mornings, Miss Pearl, the director, kept Jabari and 6 other church children from 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon while their mothers worked. Jabari would, that morning, be wearing his navy corduroy overalls over a long-sleeved white t-shirt and his brown leather sneakers, and he would be carrying in his small hands a red toy fire truck his father had given him 2 Novembers ago, the week before his father had died. Jeremiah Ross, Jabari's father, had been a warehouse floor supervisor at a shipping dispatch off Hollowell Parkway. He had been 31 years old. He had been standing on the 3rd level of a warehouse catwalk on a Monday morning in November, doing the kind of inventory count he had done 1,000 times, when a section of the catwalk's bolt had sheared from metal fatigue and the section had given way. He had fallen 22 feet. He had died before the ambulance had reached the warehouse. The settlement from the shipping company had been small because the shipping company had good lawyers, and the settlement had gone, most of it, to pay the hospital bill that the insurance had not covered. 2 years later, Imani Ross had $47 in her checking account that morning at 7:58, a rent payment of $850 due in 11 days on the little 2-bedroom bungalow she rented on Edgewood near the Martin Luther King Historic Site, and a boss who was watching her through a two-way mirror because watching Imani Ross had become, over 4 years, Mrs. Kendra Winters' small, cruel habit. But Imani was keeping her feet under her. She had written the sentence. She had opened the drawer. She had unwrapped the quarters. The day had begun, and she was in it. At 9:17, Mrs. Winters came out of the back office and walked down the tiled center aisle of the store and said, without stopping, "Imani, do not forget to recount the 7 packs of gum on end cap 4. You missed them last Thursday." "I saw." Imani said pleasantly, "Yes, ma'am, I will get to them at my break." Mrs. Winters walked past without slowing. At 9:50, a young man with a camouflage jacket bought a 6-pack of Little Debbie Swiss rolls and a quart of milk. Imani counted his change. She smiled at him. He thanked her. She wished him a good Saturday. At 10:12, an elderly gentleman in a houndstooth driving cap bought a box of chamomile tea. She wrapped it gently for him. He said, "Bless you, baby." At 10:40, Imani clocked out for her 15-minute break. She walked toward the automatic doors with her small paper cup of hot water. The store did not pay for coffee, and Imani did not buy it, and her little notebook in her apron pocket. She pushed open the second set of doors. She stepped out under the long awning of the Piggly Wiggly. The cold April rain was coming down softly. She breathed it in. She let it wet her cheeks, and she looked across Auburn Avenue, and she saw, on the bench of the MARTA bus stop on the far side of the street, the small stooped figure in the cream felt church hat. The woman was still sitting there. The woman had, it seemed, been sitting there for more than 2 hours. She was visibly shivering. Her small gloved hands were clutching her black handbag. Her head was bent forward a little, the way the head of a woman bends when she is trying to remember where she is. Imani stood under the awning of the Piggly Wiggly for the length of 2 held breaths. Then she set down her paper cup on the newspaper box. She unclipped her name badge and put it in her apron pocket so the rain would not wet the plastic. She crossed the narrow service lane. She waited for a single pickup truck to pass, and she walked. with her worn black waitress umbrella open above her head, across Auburn Avenue toward the MARTA bench. She stopped 4 feet from the bench. She did not crowd the old woman. She bent her knees very slightly, the way her father had taught her to bend her knees when she approached an old dog or a small child or a grieving widow, and she said very gently, "Ma'am, forgive me. May I offer you my umbrella?" The old woman lifted her head slowly. Under the wide brim of her cream felt church hat, her face was deep brown and soft with the small wrinkles of 78 years. Her silver white hair was coiled into a neat low bun at the back of her head, and the edge of a lavender silk scarf was visible where it had been tied underneath the hat. Behind thin gold-framed reading glasses held on a small pearl chain, her dark brown eyes were kind and they were confused, and they were wet with the kind of wetness that a dignified old woman tries very hard not to let anyone notice. "Child," the old woman said, and her voice was soft and careful and had the trained gentleness of a woman who had once, for 40 years, been a Sunday school teacher. "I believe I have missed my bus. I do not remember which bus I am meant to be on." The man at the little window said a number, and I wrote it on a piece of paper, and I believe I have put the paper in a place I cannot find. Imani moved closer. She held the umbrella over the old woman's hat and her own. She did not sit. "Ma'am, may I ask your name?" "My name is Vera," the old woman said. "My mother called me Vera, and my husband called me Vera, and my son calls me Mama Vera, and I have been Mama Vera for 51 years. I came to Atlanta yesterday to see my son. I came on the Greyhound. My taxi driver from the station was a kind young man, but I'm afraid I left my cellular telephone in the back of his taxi cab, and he drove away before I noticed, and I cannot now call my son." "Do you remember his number, ma'am?" "I have tried to remember it all morning." Mama Vera's gloved hand moved in her lap as though she was still trying. "He changed it in the autumn. There was some matter of business. He told me the new number twice. I wrote it in my little book at home. I did not think I would need to remember it. I am 78, child. My remembering is not what it was." "Where is home, ma'am?" "Savannah." "Savannah, Georgia?" "Savannah, Georgia, 31 Pulaski Square. I was born in a house 3 doors down from the one I live in now, and I have never lived anywhere else." Imani nodded slowly. She thought for the space of half a breath. She said, "Ma'am, my name is Imani Ross. I work at the Piggly Wiggly across the street. My break ends in 9 minutes. Will you allow me to walk you across this street and sit you in a warm corner of the store for the rest of the morning? I will bring you a hot cup of coffee. I will bring you a telephone. I will not leave you alone on this bench." Mama Vera looked up at Imani for a long, level moment. Then she said softly, "Child, the last time a young person offered me kindness on a Saturday morning was the year my husband died. The Lord watches how a person treats a stranger." She placed her small, gloved hand in Imani's. "I would be glad to come across the street with you." Imani walked Mama Vera across Auburn Avenue very slowly, matching her pace, the umbrella held carefully over the wide-brimmed church hat. At the automatic doors of the Piggly Wiggly, Imani held the door and guided her gently by the elbow and settled her in the small wooden chair next to the floral display at the front of the store, where the heater ran warmest. She fetched from the store's little deli counter a styrofoam cup of hot coffee with 1 cream and 1 sugar, because she had asked Mama Vera how she liked it, and she had paid for the coffee herself with the last dollar of the 5 she had brought from home that morning for her own lunch. She set the coffee gently in the old woman's gloved hands. She said, "Ma'am, I have 7 minutes left on my break. I must ring up the morning rush. My shift ends at 2. At 2, I will be yours. Do not leave this chair. Do not be afraid of anyone who walks by. If anyone is unkind to you, you call out for Imani Ross. Everyone in this store knows my name. I will come." Mama Vera smiled gently behind her thin gold spectacles. I will not move, child. Go and ring your rush. And Imani returned to register 3, and she rang the late Saturday morning crush of church ladies and young men with their Powerball tickets, and young mothers with their toddlers and their gallon milk. And she did not glance once toward the front of the store, because she did not want Mrs. Winters to notice that anyone was sitting up there at all. Mrs. Winters did not, until 12:04, notice at all. But at 12:04, Mrs. Winters came out of the back office and saw the old woman in the cream hat in the chair by the floral display, and she walked up to Imani's register between customers and said, in a low, even voice that did not sound friendly, "Who is that, Imani?" Imani looked up. "Ma'am, she is a lost customer. She took a cold wrong bus this morning. I offered her a chair out of the rain. I will drive her to the Greyhound station at the end of my shift." Mrs. Winters looked toward the old woman. She looked back at Imani. "This is not a church, Imani. This is a grocery store." "Yes, ma'am, I understand. She will be out of your store by 2:15. Mrs. Winters looked at her for a long, level moment. Then she said, "See that she is," and Mrs. Winters walked away. Imani rang up the next customer. Her hand did not tremble. At 2:04, Imani clocked out of her register. She walked to the front of the store. Mama Vera was still in the little wooden chair, and she had, in the past 2 hours, quietly watched the world of Atlanta on a Saturday pass by her in and out of the automatic doors. She had smiled at a small child with a cotton candy blue pinwheel. She had waved at an old bricklayer with a sack of fertilizer. She had said, "Bless you," to a young man buying a single rose. "Ma'am," Imani said, "my shift is over. Have you remembered the number?" "Child," Mama Vera said, "I have not. I am so sorry." "Do not be sorry, ma'am. We are going to call the Greyhound station. We are going to see if we can find a listing for your son. And if we cannot, I am going to take you to my home, and we are going to have supper with my little boy, and we are going to sleep in clean sheets tonight, and we are going to try again in the morning." Mama Vera's hand tightened very briefly on Imani's. Her eyes filmed with water that did not fall. "I do not want to be a burden to you, child." "Ma'am," Imani said, "a burden is a thing you do not have the strength to carry. You are not that thing. You are a small kindness the Lord has laid on my doorstep this morning, and my mother raised me to know the difference between the two." She tucked Mama Vera's gloved hand around her arm. "Now come. The MARTA station is 2 blocks up. I will pay both of our fares." Imani picked up Jabari at the Little Ark daycare on Edgewood at 2:35. Jabari, on seeing Mama Vera in the wide-brimmed hat, had looked up at his mother with the grave eyes of a 5-year-old evaluating a stranger, and had then, slowly, lifted his small palm to the old woman and had said, "Ma'am, my name is Jabari Ross. I am 5 years old. Do you have a truck in your pocketbook?" Mama Vera had laughed, a small surprised laugh, and had said, "Baby, I have 3 peppermints and a handkerchief. Which one would you like?" Jabari had said, "The peppermint, please, Mom." And he had taken the peppermint, and he had said, "Thank you, ma'am." And he had offered Mama Vera his hand, and he had walked her the 3 blocks to their little 2-bedroom rental on Edgewood with the same careful, slow steps Imani had used that morning at the MARTA bench. The little bungalow on Edgewood was one of the small green-painted shotgun houses that had stood on that block since the 1920s, with a narrow, covered porch, a screen door that did not quite latch, a living room with a single pine floorboard that squeaked, a kitchen with a gas stove and a yellow-checked curtain, 2 bedrooms, and a little side yard where Imani had planted last spring a small patch of tomatoes and collards. Imani had rented it from a kind widow named Miss Beulah Jackson for $850 a month, utilities included, because Miss Beulah had known Jeremiah Ross since he had been a boy. And Miss Beulah had said at the funeral, "Baby, you and that boy need a roof, and I have one." Imani had been paying rent on the first of every month for 2 years and 1 month now. on time, every time, because her father had taught her that rent was a sacred thing. Mama Vera had walked through the front door of the little house and had looked around its living room, and she had smiled the small, settled smile of a 78-year-old woman who had walked into many houses in her life and who had learned to recognize at a glance whether a house was a house that loved the person who lived in it. She had said, "Child, this is a warm little house. You have swept it this morning. You have put a vase of dogwood on the table. The Lord lives here with you, I can tell." Imani had smiled. "Ma'am, thank you. Please come sit down." "Jabari, show Mama Vera the couch." "Baby, be gentle." Jabari had, with great ceremony, led Mama Vera to the small brown couch and had placed a cotton throw pillow carefully behind her back. Mama Vera had patted the cushion beside her. Jabari had climbed up. Mama Vera had pulled from her handbag a second peppermint, which she had at 4 in the afternoon, given to Jabari solemnly, and the two of them had sat side by side on Imani's couch while Imani had boiled water for tea and had begun to dial, from the little house's landline, every Savannah listing she could find. There were, it turned out, 14 listings in Savannah under the name Blackwood. Imani called each one. Most rang out. 3 went to businesses. 2 went to answering machines of polite elderly men who did not know Mama Vera Blackwood. 1 went to a plumbing company. 1 was disconnected. Imani hung up the telephone at 6:45. She did not let her face show the thing her face wanted to show. She said brightly into the kitchen, "Ma'am, we will try again in the morning. We may need to call the Greyhound station and see if a driver picked up a phone on the 11:05 from Savannah yesterday. We may need to drive to Savannah ourselves. Do not worry. The Lord will show us the way." She wiped her hands on her apron. "What do you say to cornbread and butter beans? Jabari likes to help me stir. Jabari, come in here, baby." Mama Vera had risen slowly from the couch with her cane and had come into the little kitchen and had rolled up the sleeves of her navy blue wool overcoat, which she had never taken off, and she had said, "Child, I have been cooking butter beans for 62 years. Do you have fat back in that ice box?" Imani had said, "Ma'am, I have a ham hock a church lady gave me on Sunday." Mama Vera had said, "Then we will make them the way my grandmother made them at the parsonage in Midway, Georgia, in 1949. And they had. At 8:15, the 3 of them had sat down together at Imani's small oak kitchen table, the yellow-checked curtains glowing soft in the porch light through the window, a plate of cornbread and a pot of butter beans between them. Mama Vera had blessed the food in a long, low voice that had carried in it the cadence of 40 years of pastor's wife Sunday dinners. Jabari had bowed his head and had, without moving his lips, silently repeated every word. Imani had not lifted her eyes once during the blessing. When Mama Vera had said Amen, Jabari had looked up and had said, "Ma'am, Mama said you are a visitor. How long are you going to visit us?" And Mama Vera had looked across the little oak table at Imani, and she had said, "Baby, the Lord will tell us that too. Until he does, would you care for more cornbread?" Mama Vera slept that first night on the small brown couch. Imani had given her the good quilt, the one her grandmother had sewn the year Imani had been born, the one with the 12 yellow squares and the blue border, the one Imani had saved for company that had never come. Jabari had brought her his own feather pillow and had stood over her after she had laid down and had, without being asked, sung softly one verse of Jesus Loves Me and had said, "Good night, Mama Vera," and had gone to his little bed. Imani, in the doorway of her own bedroom, had watched the old woman pull the yellow quilt up to her chin and had seen Mama Vera's shoulders shake briefly, once under the quilt, and had turned the light out and had gone to bed. She had written in the blue notebook that night, "Today I was kind and did not count the cost." On the Sunday morning, Imani had not intended to go to Ebenezer. Imani had intended to make breakfast and to let Mama Vera rest. But Mama Vera had risen at 5:30 in the morning and had quietly, without waking anybody, combed out her long silver-white hair and had coiled it back into its low, neat bun, and had, at 6, put on her wide-brimmed cream felt church hat once more with her lavender silk scarf tied underneath. When Imani had come into the kitchen in her cotton robe at 6:15, she had found Mama Vera sitting at the little oak table with her gloves folded in her lap, her handbag on her knee, and a small waiting smile on her face. Mama Vera had said, "Child, it is Sunday. If you will have me, I will come to church with you. If you do not go to church on a Sunday, I will not judge you. But if you do, I would very much like to come." Imani had looked at the old woman in the wide-brimmed hat at her kitchen table, and Imani had, for the first time in 2 years, felt that her house had in it a grandmother. She had said, "Ma'am, we go to Ebenezer. The first service is at 8. If you will wait, I will get Jabari into his shirt." Mama Vera had said, "Child, I will wait all day." And they had walked, the three of them, from the little green-painted bungalow on Edgewood Avenue, the 4 blocks to Ebenezer Baptist Church, Jabari holding Mama Vera's gloved hand, Imani walking slowly behind them with the church bulletin her neighbor Miss Beulah had slipped under her door, and the older ladies of Ebenezer had, on seeing Mama Vera enter the sanctuary on Jabari's small arm, fallen briefly and softly silent, because there is a recognition that passes between a sanctuary full of church mothers when one of their number walks through the door. Mama Vera had sat in Imani's pew. Mama Vera had sung every verse of every hymn in a clear, quiet alto that had, 3 pews down, caused Sister Evelyn Dawes to turn and to look again, and to finally lean across and whisper to Miss Beulah Jackson, "Sister, I do not know that visitor, but that woman can sing." After service, 3 of Ebenezer's older ladies had come up to Mama Vera at coffee hour and had held both her hands and had said all the right church lady things. And Mama Vera had, in that coffee hour, acquired a small paper plate of lemon pound cake that she had broken into 3 pieces and had given 2 pieces to Jabari and 1 piece to Imani, and had kept, for herself, only the crumbs. On the walk home from Ebenezer, Mama Vera had stopped Imani at the corner of Auburn and Jackson, 2 blocks from the Piggly Wiggly, and had said softly, "Child, I do not yet know how I will find my son. I do not yet know how he will find me. But I know one thing. I know I am in a safe house. The Lord has put me in a safe house. That is a very great deal, child. That is more than a lost old woman ought to be given in 1 week." Imani had squeezed her gloved hand and had not answered because she had not trusted her voice at that corner. The Sunday supper had been smothered chicken and rice, and Mama Vera had taught Jabari how to tell when the rice was done by listening for the small, dry pop of the last grain. Jabari had taken this instruction with the solemnity of a priest receiving holy orders. He had listened to the pot for 9 minutes straight. Mama Vera had, during the last of those 9 minutes, said softly to Imani, "Child, this is a boy." Imani had said, "Yes, ma'am, he is." Mama Vera had said, "He will be a good man. Do not let the world tell you otherwise. A good man is made in the kitchen of a good mother." Imani had not answered. Imani had turned and had spooned the rice and had not let Mama Vera see her face. The next morning, the bus station directory assistance operator had no record of a found phone. The Greyhound lost and found window had no record of a Blackwood. Imani had, at 10 in the morning, dialed the 411 directory 4 more times. A kind operator named Miss Gale had, on the 5th call, said, "Sweetheart, I can search unlisted, but I cannot give out unlisted numbers. I am sorry." Imani had thanked her. She had hung up the phone. She had gone back into the kitchen. She had looked at Mama Vera, who was sitting at the small oak table with her gloves off for the first time, shelling a bowl of fresh black-eyed peas into a tin colander with Jabari, and she had said, "Ma'am, we will try again tomorrow. Would you be willing to stay another night?" Mama Vera had lifted her head slowly from the peas. She had said, "Child, Would it be a burden? Ma'am, it would be an honor. Mama Vera had stayed another night, and another. She had eaten with them on Sunday after church. She had told Jabari the story of the time she had, as a little girl of 7, gotten lost in a field of sugarcane on Ossabaw Island and had been found 3 hours later by her father, who had carried her home on his shoulders. She had, on Sunday evening, sat in the little front porch swing with Imani and had watched the streetlights come on along Edgewood. And she had said softly, "Child, when my husband was alive, we used to sit on just such a swing on Pulaski Square. He would hold my hand. I miss him every evening at this hour." Imani had not spoken. Imani had laid her hand gently over the old woman's small, gloved hand. They had sat that way for a long, quiet time. On Monday morning at 7:30, Imani gave Mama Vera $60 out of her rent envelope. Not all of it, but the $60 that had been put aside for the gas bill. She pressed it firmly into the old woman's hand. She said, "Ma'am, I have called a Greyhound. There is a 10:30 bus to Savannah. It is $17. The remainder is for a taxi cab home from the Savannah station and for a sandwich along the way and for any other thing you may need. Do not refuse me. I will not be refused." Mama Vera had not, in the end, refused. She had instead taken the folded bills and had pressed them into a small inside pocket of her black leather handbag and had said, "Child, I will repay you. I may not be able to repay you in a week. I may not be able to repay you in a month. But before the year is out, I will repay you. And the Lord will help me. The Lord sees more than he tells." Imani had walked Mama Vera to the MARTA stop. She had put her on the train. She had told the driver, "Sir, this lady is going to the downtown Greyhound station. Her ticket is the 10:30 to Savannah. Please do not let her get off before her stop." The driver, a man of perhaps 60, had said, "Ma'am, I will personally walk her to the Greyhound counter." Imani had paid the driver $1. She had not had any more dollars. Mama Vera, through the window of the MARTA train as the doors had closed, had lifted her small gloved hand. Imani had lifted her own. Jabara, at her hip, had waved the red fire truck. The train had rolled away. Rain. Imani had walked home in the morning sunshine with her son on her hip. She had said to the child on her hip, "Baby, we did a right thing. Whatever comes next, we did a right thing." Whatever came next came the following Monday morning at 9:15, when Imani clocked in for her shift at the Piggly Wiggly and found Mrs. Kendra Winters standing at her register. Mrs. Winters did not say good morning. Mrs. Winters said, "Imani, please come to the office." Imani had followed her. Mrs. Winters had sat down at her small metal desk. She had gestured to the folding chair across from it. She had opened a folder. She had said, "I have reviewed the security footage from the Saturday shift 9 days ago. The footage of the front of store seating area between 12:04 and 2:14. Imani had said nothing. "You allowed an unauthorized person to occupy company property for 2 hours and 10 minutes. You supplied that unauthorized person with a company cup of coffee from the deli counter, for which no receipt exists in the deli register." "Mrs. Winters," Imani said very quietly, "I paid for that coffee in cash out of my own purse. I have the receipt. I can show you. It is in my wallet. I paid. You paid a cashier on another register to a different SKU code. You did not use the employee charge account. The coffee was removed from the deli inventory under no accounting code. It shows as shrink. Ma'am, I can produce the receipt. The receipt is irrelevant. The matter is policy. You have also, in violation of policy section 11.4, used a company chair as a rest station for a non-customer. You have also harbored a person overnight. Yes, Imani, I know what you did the rest of that weekend, because you spoke about it to Leon the bagger, and Leon is a company employee, and the break room is a company space, and we do not gossip on company time in our break rooms about what we did on Saturday evenings. You have also harbored a non-customer overnight for 3 consecutive nights using funds you spent that were not company funds, I understand, but the matter goes to character, and the character of our employees reflects on our store. Mrs. Winters, please. I am terminating your employment today for cause. You will leave the premises by 10:05. Your final check will not include the 3 days of unused personal time you accrued in March, as those are, in cases of termination for cause, forfeit. You will return your name badge, your apron, and your register key before you leave the office. There will be no severance. Imani had not wept. Imani had, in that small office under the flickering fluorescent light, taken off her name badge. She had laid it on the metal desk. She had unbuckled her apron. She had laid it on the metal desk. She had laid the little silver register key on the metal desk. She had said, softly, without shaking, "Mrs. Winters, I did a Christian thing for a lost old woman on a rainy Saturday morning. You are firing me for a Christian thing." Mrs. Winters did not look up from her folder. Termination effective immediately. Imani had risen. She had closed the office door behind her. She had walked out of the Piggly Wiggly past Register 3, where another young woman, a girl of perhaps 21, whose name Imani did not know, was already wearing an apron with her name basted on. Imani had walked out the automatic doors. She had stood on the sidewalk. She had breathed once, slowly. Then she had crossed Auburn Avenue back to the MARTA stop where Mama Vera had, 9 days earlier, been shivering in the rain. She had sat down on the same bench. She had sat for 11 minutes. She had then stood up, wiped her cheeks, straightened her head wrap, and walked to the train. She had written in her notebook that evening, "The right thing does not always pay on the day you do it, but the right thing is still the right thing." The next 2 weeks were the 2 hardest of Imani Ross's life, since the morning Jeremiah had died. She had applied to 14 places. 4 had called her back. 2 had offered her interviews for part-time evenings at less than minimum wage cash under the table. She had not taken them because she had needed to be home with Jabari in the evenings. She had sold at the pawn shop on Memorial Drive her wedding ring. The broker had looked at the thin gold band for a long moment. He had said, "Ma'am, this is not a gold ring I can give you a good price for. It is a very thin band. The best I can do is $120. She had taken the 120. She had sold Jeremiah's tools, his DeWalt drill, his little box of wrenches, the socket set, everything. 180. She had written in her notebook that night, "I have sold my husband's hands. I did it so the boy could eat." She had gone to the deacon's committee at Ebenezer Baptist Church. She had told the deacon, an older gentleman named Reverend Marcus Hill, the whole story. He had listened in his small, tidy office under the stained glass portrait of a patient shepherd. He had folded his hands on his desk. He had said, "Sister, the benevolence fund can release to you $200. We will do it today. I wish it were more. Sister, have you considered the community pantry on Ashby?" She had thanked him. She had, at his urging, let him lay his broad elder's hand on her forehead, and he had prayed a short prayer that the Lord would set the right people in her path within 14 days, because 14 days was the number he had felt in his spirit, and the Lord he served was a Lord who kept appointments. She had gone to the community pantry on Ashby Street. She had stood in line for 40 minutes behind a young woman with 2 toddlers and behind an old veteran with a cane and behind a soft-spoken mother in a nurse's uniform who had finished a night shift at Grady Memorial and had not yet slept. She had received at the counter a sack of dried rice, a sack of pinto beans, a jar of peanut butter, a box of powdered milk, 2 cans of green beans, a small bag of sweet potatoes, and a wedge of yellow cheese in a wax wrapper. The kind woman at the counter, a retired school cafeteria manager named Miss Hattie Pitts, had looked at Imani for a long, quiet moment and had said, "Sister, come back Wednesday. Come back every Wednesday for as long as you need to come. I have been that young woman at this counter. I know this counter from both sides. Do not be ashamed of this counter. This counter is the Lord's work." Imani had thanked Miss Hattie. She had walked home with the sack on her hip. She had made a pot of red beans and rice that night, and she had made it last through Wednesday. And she had, on Wednesday, returned to Miss Hattie's counter, and Miss Hattie had, without being asked, slipped an extra jar of peanut butter into Imani's sack and had winked one kind eye. Imani had, that same first week, walked 3 times to the Piggly Wiggly on Moreland Avenue to apply for a cashier's job because she had thought that perhaps the sister store would hire her. The manager on Moreland had been a polite young man who had said, "Sister, I would love to hire you, but the Auburn store manager has put a note in the regional file. I cannot override it." Imani had thanked him and had not argued, because she had known by then what kind of note Mrs. Winters would write. She had made those things last. On the morning of the 17th, when the electricity shut-off notice had taped itself to her front door, Imani had stood in her kitchen and had laid her hand flat against the yellow-checked curtain and had looked out at the small patch of collards in the side yard, and she had said softly, "Mama, Daddy, Jeremiah, I am not yet afraid, but the Lord has a hard thing on my doorstep today, and I will need some help holding it." She had opened the window. A soft, cold breath of April had come in. She had closed the window. She had gone to find Jabari. Jabari had been sitting on the living room floor in his navy corduroy overalls, rolling the red fire truck along a seam in the hardwood. She had knelt down in front of him. She had said, "Baby, tonight you and Mama may not have lights. You may have to sleep with Mama in the big bed. We will have flashlights. It will be a little camping trip right here in our own house." Jabari had looked up with his wide, dark eyes. He had said, "Mama, are you still the boss?" Imani had laughed once softly and had said, "Babe, I am still the boss. The lights are just taking a day off." Jabari had nodded. He had said, "All right, tell the lights I forgive them." On the morning of the 18th, a Monday, 4 weeks after the rainy Saturday, Imani was on her knees in the little side yard pulling crabgrass out from around her collared patch, because she did not yet have anywhere to go and she did not yet have anyone to call, when she heard, out on Edgewood Avenue, the low, quiet hum of 2 engines that did not sound like the engines of Edgewood. She looked up. 2 large black Mercedes S-Class sedans had pulled up in front of her little green-painted bungalow. The lead Mercedes's rear door had opened, and out had stepped a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray wool 3-piece suit, a crisp white dress shirt, a dark navy silk tie, a matching navy pocket square, polished black leather Oxfords, and on his left wrist a silver Patek Philippe watch on a brown alligator strap. His skin was deep, warm brown. His close, trim black beard was threaded faintly with silver along the jawline. A small, faint scar ran through the outer edge of his left eyebrow. He had a calm, observant face, the kind of face that listened. He had shut the car door behind him. He had walked without hurry up the short brick walk to the porch of the little bungalow. He had stopped 3 feet from the porch steps. He had not climbed them. "Mrs. Ross," he had said in a low, measured voice, "forgive me for arriving without notice. My name is Darius Blackwood. My mother, Mrs. Vera Blackwood, came home from Atlanta 3 weeks and 4 days ago. She told me that first evening the story of the young woman in a red head wrap and her small boy named Jabari, who had taken her in at a MARTA bench on a rainy Saturday and had fed her butter beans and cornbread for 3 nights. I have spent the past 23 days finding you, Mrs. Ross. I spent them carefully because my mother had only 3 pieces of information. Your first name, the name of your child, a Piggly Wiggly on Auburn Avenue. Are you Mrs. Imani Ross?" Imani had risen slowly from among her collards. She had wiped her hands on her apron. She had, for a long-held moment, simply looked at him. "I am Imani Ross." "Ma'am," Darius Blackwood had said, "my mother is in the second car. She asked me to find you." She has been for 3 weeks trying to find you herself. She asked me to come with her. She is in the back seat of the second Mercedes. She would like to embrace you, if you will allow her. May I bring her up?" Imani had said very softly, "Mr. Blackwood, please bring her up." Darius had turned. He had walked back down the brick walk. He had opened the rear passenger door of the second Mercedes. He had offered his arm, and out of the second car, with her brass-handled cane, with her white orthopedic shoes, with her lavender silk headscarf under the same wide-brimmed cream felt church hat, had stepped Mama Vera Blackwood. Mama Vera had walked up the brick walk slowly on her son's arm. She had stopped at the foot of the little porch steps. She had looked up at Imani. Her dark brown eyes behind the thin gold-framed spectacles on the pearl chain had filled and had brimmed and had overflowed. "Child," Mama Vera had said, her voice shaking now in a way it had never shaken before. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I did not know how to find you. I tried. I could not remember. My son tried. We looked. We looked so hard. Child, they told me last week they had found you. They told me this morning where you lived. I made Darius drive me here at 8 o'clock. Please forgive me for being late. Please forgive me." Imani had come down the porch steps. She had taken Mama Vera into her arms. She had held the old woman against her shoulder in the small front yard of the little green-painted bungalow on Edgewood Avenue, and Mama Vera had wept for a long, slow, measured half-minute into the shoulder of Imani's cottonwork shirt, and Jabari, who had come running from the side yard at the sound of Mama Vera's voice and had stopped at the top of the porch steps and had looked down at the scene on the brick walk with his wide, grave 5-year-old eyes, had said softly, "Mama Vera, you came back." Mama Vera had lifted her head and had said, through her tears, "Baby, I came back." Darius Blackwood had stood 2 steps back from them quietly and had not spoken, and had waited because a man raised by Mama Vera Blackwood had been raised to know when a moment belonged to somebody else. When the moment was finished, Darius had stepped forward. He had said, "Mrs. Ross, may I speak with you for a moment on your porch?" "You may, Mr. Blackwood." They had gone to the porch. Mama Vera, holding Jabari's hand, had remained on the walk. Darius had said, "Mrs. Ross, before I say anything else, I owe you a piece of information. My mother has, for the last 11 months, lived with the early stages of a mild cognitive condition. She is lucid most of the morning. In the afternoon, she sometimes becomes confused. She is not in danger. Her doctors tell her she has many good years ahead of her. But she ought not to travel alone, and she knows that now, and I know that now. When she came to Atlanta 3 weeks and 4 days ago, she came without telling me. She came because she had promised my late aunt, her sister, that she would visit my aunt's grave on the anniversary of her passing at Oakland Cemetery. My aunt is buried in Oakland Cemetery, here in Atlanta. My mother had, in her quiet way, decided she would come and go in one day and not trouble me." He paused. "She did not come home for 3 nights. Her taxi driver remembered her at the Greyhound station, but not at any hotel. When she called me at last from a little bodega payphone in Savannah on the following Tuesday afternoon, I had, for a period of 72 hours, believed I had lost my mother. Do you know, Mrs. Ross, what a man in my position will promise God when he believes he has lost his mother?" Imani had said softly, "I do, Mr. Blackwood. She told me the story of you. She told me the story of your butter beans. She told me the story of your Jabari with his red fire truck. She told me you gave her $60 on a Monday morning and put her on a MARTA train with a $1 tip to a driver. She said you had asked nothing of her in return. She said she had promised you she would repay you before the year was out. She said she had meant it." He looked across the porch railing at his mother on the walk. "I have come today, Mrs. Ross, to keep her promise, with her instruction, with her full consent." He had reached then into the inner pocket of his charcoal gray suit jacket and had taken out a slim leather folio. He had opened it. He had laid it flat on the porch railing. A week ago last Thursday, he had said, my company, Blackwood Maritime Holdings, concluded the purchase of the Piggly Wiggly Atlanta regional chain from its previous family owners. Effective as of that Thursday, I am the ultimate owner of the Piggly Wiggly store on Auburn and Jackson, at which you were employed for 4 years and from which you were terminated 9 days ago by Mrs. Kendra Winters. I have this morning reinstated your employment to a new position. I have also terminated Mrs. Winters' employment, effective today, for cause. Mrs. Winters is currently seated with 2 members of my human resources team in the rear of that second Mercedes behind my mother. She will be returned to the store this afternoon with a police escort to collect her belongings. She will not be reemployed by any concern connected to this company. He had then handed Imani a simple printed document. Your new position, Mrs. Ross, is Community Services Coordinator for the Piggly Wiggly Atlanta region. Your work will consist of running a program of small kindnesses in each of our 11 stores, including a seating area at the front of every location where lost or confused members of the community may sit at no cost with a cup of coffee paid for by the company and a volunteer on staff to help them reach a loved one. The program will be named the Mama Vera Program. Its first coordinator, at a salary of $62,000 a year, full benefits, will be you, if you will have it. Imani had not spoken for a long moment. She had slowly sat down on the top step of her porch. She had placed the printed document carefully in her lap. She had looked out across Edgewood Avenue at the spring morning. Then she had looked up at the tall, quiet man in the charcoal suit, and she had said, very softly, Mr. Blackwood, I was going to lose my lights tonight. I was, tomorrow morning, going to lose my home. An hour ago, I was on my knees in that side yard asking the Lord for a small help I did not see how I would receive. She had swallowed. I accept your offer. I accept it with thanks, and I accept it as a workman accepts a tool. I will earn every dollar of it. Darius Blackwood had then done a small thing that surprised even him. He had taken off his suit jacket. He had folded it over his arm. He had sat down on the step next to her, and he had said, Mrs. Ross, I have one more thing to tell you. The final check you were denied by Mrs. Winters will be paid this afternoon with the 3 days of accrued leave. Your last 11 days of back pay will be paid as if you had worked them, because the reason you did not work them is a reason I do not recognize. Your rent on this house, Mrs. Ross, is paid through the end of September. Your electricity bill has been paid in full this morning. There is a small envelope in the glove box of the lead Mercedes containing $1,000 in cash for groceries and whatever else you may need in the next 2 weeks. None of this is charity. It is, Mrs. Ross, the repayment of a debt. It is a little less than the debt. It is all I could do in one morning. He had paused. Do not refuse me. I will not be refused. Imani had laughed once, a surprised laugh, and a tear had slid down her left cheek. Mr. Blackwood, she had said, my grandmother used to say that. Darius had smiled for the first time that morning. Mrs. Ross, my mother said it to me at 7:30 this morning, word for word. He had stood up. He had extended his hand. Will you and your son come inside your house? My mother would like very much to come in and sit down on the couch where she slept for 3 nights. She would like Jabari to show her the red fire truck, which she remembers carefully. And I would like to tell you properly how my mother describes the 3 nights she spent under this roof. It is the best conversation she has had in 11 months. I believe you will want to hear it, Mrs. Ross. Imani had risen. She had taken Mr. Blackwood's hand. She had turned to the walk and had called softly, Mama Vera, come home. And the old woman, small and stooped and smiling now through the tears behind the thin gold spectacles, had started up the brick walk on Jabari's small hand. And Imani Ross had opened the screen door of the little green painted bungalow on Edgewood Avenue and had held it for them and had let them in. On the afternoon of that same Monday, the second Mercedes had pulled up in front of the Piggly Wiggly on Auburn Avenue, and Mrs. Kendra Winters had, under the quiet supervision of two Blackwood Maritime Human Resources officers and a patient Atlanta police officer named Sergeant Dawn Patterson, collected from her small metal office her personal effects, her houseplant, her little frame photograph of a nephew, and the clipboard she had carried for 4 years. She had been walked out of the Piggly Wiggly she had managed for 6.5 years in full view of the Saturday morning customers. She had not said one word. The police officer had held the door. At 4 o'clock that same afternoon, the young woman Mrs. Winters had hired at Register 3 on the morning of Imani's termination, a quiet, soft-spoken 21-year-old named Tanaqua Booker, who had needed the job, had been walked back to Register 3 by the regional vice president of Blackwood Maritime, who had told her, gently, that her job was secure and her paycheck would continue, and that she was now working alongside a new community services coordinator named Mrs. Imani Ross, who would be in every day for a week of training. Tanaqua had wept softly and had thanked him. She had not known why Imani had been fired. She had, in the 9 days since, been having trouble sleeping, and by 5 o'clock that afternoon, Mama Vera Blackwood was seated in the front of store community services chair that Darius's carpenters had, that very afternoon, carried into the Piggly Wiggly on a dolly and had set in place beside the floral display. The chair was oak, upholstered in deep blue corduroy, with a small brass plaque on its right arm that read, simply, "The Mama Vera chair, for anyone who needs a moment." Mama Vera had sat in it for an hour and 45 minutes that first evening, and she had talked to every customer who had paused near her, and she had told 9 of them the story of how a young woman at this very store had, one rainy Saturday, saved her life. The customers had listened. Many had wept. One had hugged her. One, a retired school teacher from Macon, had said, "Baby, I have a Mama Vera story too. Let me tell it to you." Mama Vera had said, "Child, sit down. I have the time." Darius Blackwood had begun driving from Savannah to Atlanta every Sunday afternoon, ostensibly to check on the new community program. But in fact, as Imani had noticed by the 4th Sunday, to sit in her little kitchen and drink a cup of her chamomile tea and talk to her son about the books he was reading and the trucks he was drawing. He had not, at first, talked to Imani about anything beyond the program and the store and the weather. In the 6th week, he had asked on the porch at dusk if he might take Jabari to Stone Mountain Park the following Saturday, with Imani if she wished, or alone if she trusted him. Imani had said, "I trust you with my son, Mr. Blackwood. I will come along too." Darius had said, "Ma'am, you do not need to trust me with anything you do not care to trust me with." On the 10th week, he had taught Jabari, on a blanket under a magnolia tree at Oakland Cemetery, how to hold a pocket knife and whittle a stick. They had sat, the 3 of them, near the grave of Mama Vera's older sister, a grave which Mama Vera had asked her son to take Jabari to see, because Jabari had asked her to. Mama Vera had sat in her wheelchair on the path with Imani and had talked about her sister for an hour. On a Sunday evening in the first week of August, sitting on the porch swing of the little green-painted bungalow on Edgewood Avenue, Darius Blackwood had said, very simply, "Imani, I do not wish to rush any of this. I wish to say clearly to you that I would consider it the honor of my life if you would allow me, slowly, at your own pace, without any agreement from you today, to begin to court you." He had, without looking at her, added, "My mother has asked me for 4 months whether I was going to find the courage." Imani had looked out across Edgewood Avenue. She had watched the first street lamp come on. She had said, "Mr. Blackwood." "Darius," he had said, "please." "Darius, I love my husband. I loved him when we were 18, and I loved him when we were 25, and I loved him on the Monday morning when he left this house for the last time. I will not unlove him. I will not pretend to unlove him. Do you understand that? I do, Imani, but my heart, she had said, is larger than it was in November of 2 years ago. I did not know then that it was larger. I did not know until a 78-year-old woman in a wide-brimmed church hat sat in my kitchen for 3 nights and sang to my son, I have room, Darius. I will court you back at your own pace without any agreement from you today. Beginning with a second cup of tea on this porch. If you will stay. He had stayed. He had stayed until 8:45. Jabari had, from inside the screen door, called out at 7:30, Mama, I am ready for my bath. And Darius had gently risen from the swing and had gone inside and had, to Imani's quiet surprise, helped Jabari run his bath and scrub behind his ears and brush his teeth, because Darius Blackwood had been raised by a woman who had taught him that a man who would court a mother had better know how to draw a boy's bath. Jabari had, at 7:55, been put to bed in his little cotton pajamas with the small red trucks on them. Darius had read him one chapter of a book called The Toy Maker of Boys. Jabari had fallen asleep halfway through chapter 1. 13 months after the rainy Saturday at the MARTA bench, on a bright Saturday morning in the first week of May, Imani Ross had walked down the center aisle of Ebenezer Baptist Church in a simple floor-length cream silk gown with long sleeves and a modest high neckline, her hair pinned in soft waves to one side, a small pearl earring in each ear, a thin gold bracelet on her right wrist, the little crescent scar on her left cheek visible in the warm church light, a small bouquet of white dogwood blossoms in her hands. Mama Vera Blackwood had walked her down the aisle. Mama Vera had walked slowly. Mama Vera had walked with her brass-handled cane in her left hand and Imani's arm in her right. Mama Vera had walked all the way to the front of the sanctuary in her pale blue silk headscarf and her lavender cotton Sunday dress. And she had, at the altar, placed Imani's hand in Darius's hand with the careful ceremony of a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. She had said before she had turned away, soft enough that only the three of them had heard her, Son, this one is the finest the Lord ever sent my way. You mind her the way your daddy minded me? You hear me? Darius had said, Yes, Mama. Jabari, 5 years old and a half, had been the ring bearer. He had worn a navy three-piece suit that Darius had helped him pick out at a little tailor on Edgewood, with a red silk pocket square that had matched his toy fire truck. He had carried the little white satin pillow at just the right height. He had walked the whole aisle without stopping to wave at any of the people in the pews because he had practiced with Mama Vera for 4 Saturdays. Reverend Marcus Hill, the same deacon who had released $200 to Imani out of the benevolence fund, had officiated. He had said in his low, patient voice every one of the words that are said at weddings. He had asked every one of the questions. He had, at the end, said, Now by the power vested in me, by the state of Georgia and by the living God, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Blackwood, you may kiss your bride. Darius had kissed his bride, and Mama Vera Blackwood, seated in the front pew in her lavender dress, holding Jabari Ross's small brown hand in her small gloved one, had wept softly and had whispered to Jabari, Baby, this is what butter beans and cornbread can do. Imani Ross Blackwood and Darius Blackwood were married for 31 years, until the morning a heart condition Darius had never told anyone about took him from his wife and son on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. Mama Vera lived to be 94. She died peacefully in her sleep at her house on Pulaski Square in Savannah on the morning of the first Sunday of Advent, with Jabari, by then a grown man of 27, a dentist with his own small practice in Atlanta, sitting in the chair by her bed reading aloud from the book of Isaiah. Imani, by then 58 years old, and the director of a small foundation that funded front-of-store community services chairs in nearly 200 grocery stores across 8 southern states, had held Mama Vera's hand while Jabari had read. When Mama Vera's breathing had slowed and quieted, Imani had bent and had kissed the small, soft brown forehead and had said, "Mama, you paid me back. You paid me back 10,000 times over. I will miss you every morning of my life." Imani Ross Blackwood had lived on and had kept writing every night of her life a single true sentence in a blue 5-and-dime notebook with a little metal spiral along its spine, and some of those sentences had made it, one day, into a small worn book her daughter-in-law would, 40 years after the events of this story, publish under the title Sugar, the Lord Sprinkled on a Patient Child. The first sentence in that book was the sentence Imani had written on the evening of the rainy Saturday in April. It read, "Today I was kind and did not count the cost." There are people in this world who will tell you that a widow on her knees in her side yard pulling crabgrass with a shut-off notice taped to her front door is a woman to pity, or a woman to forget, or a woman to drive past. There are people in this world who will tell you that an old woman in a wide-brimmed church hat on a rainy MARTA bench is somebody else's problem. There are people in this world who will tell you that a kindness done for a stranger on a Saturday morning does not come back. We disagree. This story was told for you tonight by a voice that loves you, for hearts that have carried more than their share. May the kindness you have done for the tired old woman on the cold bench be returned to you in the fullness of time. May the rent you have paid down to the last envelope be kept one day by a man you did not know was coming. May your own Mama Vera knock on your door at midnight, and may you have the good sense to let her in. May your own Jabari one day remember that you were still the boss. And may every small kindness you have ever done, when the world was not watching, be met, in the fullness of the Lord's appointed time, by a Mercedes at your curb and an old woman on your brick walk. And may you have the grace to come down the steps and to open your arms and to say, softly, "Mama, come home." Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.